And welcome to everyone on the line. So thank you for joining me to discuss what we think is a really interesting and I think practical conversation for modern workplaces. And that is, how do you create a culture of trust for a psychologically safe workplace? We'd argue that more and more the concept of trust and psychological safety is being recognized as critical in creating high-performing organizations, because it's a foundation in enabling people to effectively communicate, and it's also a foundation in creating the type of safety culture that many organizations are seeking. Beside trust, making places a nicer place to work, it's critical in ensuring that we're getting hazards reported, safety concerns raised, that leaders and teams are communicating effectively, that people feel free to report failures and to generally put forward their ideas without fear of retribution. So what we'll be covering off on in this webinar is some of the research that we've found into I guess the current state of trust within organizations and the impact it's having, and some really practical skills and tools that you can use to start to build psychological safety and trust within your organization. It's easy to say these things, but often when it comes to the rubber hitting the road, people aren't quite sure where to start. So there'll be a handout that will go out in a future email, which will summarize everything that we've covered today. And I really encourage you to take some notes and use these slides as a way of continuing this conversation within your organization. As introduced earlier, our I guess mission at Sentis is to change the lives of individuals and organizations for the better every day. We do that through helping organizations transform their safety culture through a series of through a suite of tools, including cultural diagnostic tools that help you understand and pinpoint the best courses of action, through to leadership and team development. As I mentioned, the handout that you'll be provided looks like this. It provides some really nice questions and reflection points and a summary of some of the concepts that we talk about today. Thought I'd kick off today's session with a story that's really familiar, I think, for a number of us when it comes to this idea of psychological safety. So up on the screen here, we've got a chap, let's call him Barry, for lack of a better name. And he's an experienced operator in a new organization. Barry has a broad experience and he's generally happy to share his ideas. On this particular day, a week in, at the start of the day, he's part of a pre-start or a toolbox meeting, and the team lead is handing out tasks for the day, and the whole group turns their attention towards the major task for the day. The discussion breaks out about the plan on the best way to tackle it. There's a few complicated aspects to the job. And as the plan starts to get hashed out, Barry remembers another job he did years ago with another employer. And the plan that's been discussed has the potential, from his experience, to go pear-shaped. So he mustered all his courage and he thought he'd speak up. So he waits and waits and waits, and he waits for a break in the conversation. He speaks up and he tells the team lead and the rest of the group the potential downfalls of the decision they're making and what they did on this particular job to correct it. The team lead looks at him impatiently, tapping his foot, as do the most vocal people in mapping out the plan. Just before Barry's about to finish his speech, he gets cut off by the supervisor. So thanks for that, Barry. Welcome to the team, by the way. We've got the plan now, and what you've suggested isn't the way we do things around here. Thanks, anyway. All right, guys, you know the job to be done. Let's get on with it. I've seen this dynamic or variants of this dynamic play out so many times in organizations over the years, where people have ideas, people have suggestions, people have things that they want to bring up that could potentially improve the safety of the overall performance of a job, and for whatever reason, their suggestions and their ideas go unheard. So what's going on for the supervisor in this situation, which means that he that isn't willing to listen to a suggestion from Barry? What goes on in Barry's brain when he doesn't feel heard, and how's he likely to act into the future, and what dynamic is set up in that conversation, and what impact do you think that has on the rest of the team? So we're going to start to flesh out scenarios like this in the next couple of sections together. We're going to look at it from a brain science perspective, and we're going to look at, well, what can we do as leaders and what can we do as organizations to start to influence a different culture, a culture where people have the psychological safety and trust to speak up without fear of retribution. So as I mentioned, we're going to cover this topic off in 3 key steps. We're going to first of all look at culture and psychological safety and a bit of research that we've done around that. We're going to look at the science behind trust, and we're going to look at some really practical steps and tools that you can put into place to develop psychological safety and trust. We'll kick off by looking at a bit of research from our own report. So the particular research you're going to see here is out of one of our studies, and the sample group that we used is about 12,500 people. Were part of the sample group from 8 countries and 9 industries. So the countries included Botswana, Namibia, New Zealand, US, UK, Germany, and Canada. And the industries covered were also quite broad: agriculture, construction, education, government, industrial services, manufacturing, mining, and oil and gas. And what this research on the left-hand side said is that one of the key drivers of underreporting, so 37% of incidents that go underreported or unreported, are done so through fear and fear of negative repercussions. So sit and think about that for a second. That means that 37% of people who don't report incidents, and there's quite a number within organizations. If you remember some of our webinars from last year, they do so because they're fearful of harsh or punitive disciplinary action, or potentially even losing their job. They're also concerned, or they also may be concerned about the social ramifications. So, such as Barry, will he be embarrassed in front of a group? Or will he be diminished in front of his peers? So they also might feel that they could be blamed for reporting in some incidents. So in some organizations, it's like the person who found it is the person who's held responsible. So, and then finally, where there's strong focuses on lag indicators that are tied to bonuses, so total recordable injury frequency rates tied to bonuses, that also drives a fear culture. So one of the major drivers that we see within organizations is a fear to actually report and give up ideas. Now, that's a huge issue for a number of organizations. And what that really suggests is, I don't trust my leader. And that's often driven by leaders not actually trusting their workforce. On the right-hand side here, what this shows is that 40% of organizations operate in a positive safety culture. 40% of organizations that operate in a positive safety culture show a team support for safety as a strength. So we tend to see a team support for safety as a strength in organizations that are more mature on the maturity curve. So organizations in the private compliance or mateship space. So this is where we're starting to see individuals really own safety at a team and at the floor level. So at this point, what we're tending to see is that you've got workers that more genuinely care for safety and support one another. They look out to actively look out to encourage one another, and they're more willing to speak up. And one of the key things that we found across the studies, of course, was the amount of trust and psychological safety between the two. Again, the highest underreporting rates were typically in those less mature sites where the trust and psychological safety was low, and we saw greater psychological safety and trust. Where we saw greater psychological safety and trust, we saw a perceived greater team support for safety, a perceived greater role modeling from leaders, and an overall greater willingness to report errors and incidents. So consider this. Unless the mistrust of a workforce can be overcome, even the most well-intentioned and sophisticated management initiatives will be treated with cynicism and undermined. So again, this is where trust becomes really critical, and again, where we find ourselves at Sentis doing a bunch of work within organizations. We can have the most sophisticated policies and procedures in the world. We can have great equipment and great machinery and great tools. But if we don't have trust between leaders and the workforce, if trust isn't the foundation of the relationship, there's only so far you can take the performance of that organization. So what we need, without trust, we see that we start to miss out on things like the consultation between team members and leads, clear channels of constructive communication, between team communication, effective up and down communication, and again that I guess wave of ideas and positivity that can come from a strong positive safety culture. So got a quick poll here, which I'll ask Sarah to pop up in a moment. And the poll is just a quick check-in for those that are on the line now. So a quick question for you is, have you found that a lack of trust has undermined workplace initiatives in the past? So nice, simple, yes, no. Have you found that a lack of trust has undermined workplace initiatives in the past? So some clues that it has would be, all right, well, we just need to wait till this sugar hit passes and we can get back to normal. It's just a new leader trying to make their mark. It's people ducking for cover when you're making particular comments. Perhaps there's you've heard of filtering at the front line. Don't blame me. Blame management. It's not my decision. Have you heard any of these sorts of clues coming through, or have you seen any interesting body language when announcements have been made to the workforce?
Hey, I'm going to launch that now.
Great, thank you. Okay, so 98% of respondents have said yes. So big opportunity for a number of people on the call. So how do we tackle this? Well, first of all, we need to understand the dynamic that we're dealing with in terms of an organization. What are the, I guess, underpinning attitudes and motivators and drivers of the business that we're working in right now? Because this is important in understanding, well, what's the next most logical step and progression in starting to build trust? If we look at this particular model on the screen, you can see on the left-hand side, you're at a counterproductive place. At a counterproductive place, it's a real us and them type of culture. I don't feel my leader cares about me and I don't care about my leader. And the same thing goes for safety. I don't feel my leader cares about safety, so why should I care about safety? I'm just going to get the job done. I'm just going to try not to lose my job. At public compliance, this is where we start to see, possibly because of external influence often, leaders really trying to impose safety on the workforce. This is, heavy focus on procedures, heavy focus on compliance type of activities without necessarily putting a lot of attention on, well, what's the intent of these particular tools. So you can nearly see an obsession in some of these instances with compliance, and that can be often perceived by the workforce as simply a backside covering exercise by management. So where we start to see a bit of a tipping point here is from public compliance to private compliance. But this is also often the most tricky transition for organizations to make, because what we're looking to do from public compliance to private compliance is to shift from a culture where safety is imposed on me by my leader to I take personal responsibility and accountability of my safety. And then at mateship, we're actually looking for people to look out for one another. So you need to have a safe enough environment that I can challenge my peers and my colleagues. And at citizenship, this is where people can feel free, or, well, more than free. They feel obliged, they feel committed to speaking up, because they see safety is a core part of everyone's job, and that the little decisions and the little conversations that they have every day are critical in the overall shift of the organisation to get everyone home safe to the things that matter most to them. So something to reflect on here is, well, first of all, it's important to understand, if you're in the left-hand side of this model, why are you on the left-hand side of the model? And more often than not, leader, we see that there's a mirroring of culture to leaders. So if we've got a leadership group that has a public compliance mindset, that's typically representative of the workforce. So the first step that needs to be changed here is put into place, and what we see more mature organizations start to do is to set a really clear vision and mission and get leaders aligned around that. And then it's about systematically looking at, well, what are the pain points? What are driving the current unwanted elements of our culture, and putting a plan into place. But we're going to, again, more practically about the behaviors leaders can start to engage in to create this shift in just a moment. So as we've mentioned, when you've got the left, a nice easy way to think about this culture is in two parts rather than the 5 steps. So if you wanted a quick summary of what it looks like to be on the left-hand side, you're typically looking at a blame and avoidance culture. So in this culture, if something goes wrong, it's whose backside are we going to kick or who are we going to sack. It's always about playing the person and not the ball. In more mature organizations where you've got greater senses of ownership and trust, we start to see a focus on systems and not just the people. So people are obviously critical, and we need to obviously value them and give them the skills to do the job. But when, say, an incident occurs, we look at, well, what are all the factors that contributed to this, as opposed to just the person component. And you'll find typically in that red space, all incident investigations lead back to people, and in the green space, it'll often find that people play a role, but there'll often be other factors, for example, that come into play. Left-hand side, again, you're looking for blame. Right-hand side, you're starting to look for learning. And you can imagine how this particularly plays out. Now, it's important to understand how these two broad cultural groups can play out if you don't do something deliberately to address them. And if you reflect on your own culture or the cultures of organizations that you've worked in, hopefully you've experienced the green culture, the ownership and trust at some stage. And I imagine that most people will have experienced the blame and avoid red culture at some stage as well. If you find that you're in the red culture, hoping that something's going to change probably isn't going to lead to that outcome, because in that red zone, we tend to see a prevailing attitude of it's not my job, it's not my accountability, it's not my responsibility, blame, avoid, and point the finger at others. So from a psychological perspective, we'd be looking at an external locus of control. Now, external locus of control is typically a default for most humans when things aren't going to plan. And yeah, it's easier not to take ownership and responsibility. It's easier to blame someone else. And it takes often some maturity and some deliberate thinking to flip into, well, what's my portion of responsibility in the types of results that I've got? So let's imagine you've got a red zone culture, low trust, blame, avoidance, low accountability. You bring someone in that's a green zone person. What do you think happens with that green zone person over time? Well, the typical response I get is, they try their best to turn the red zone green, and I think they often do. But what I typically find is that one of two things happen in a really prevailing red zone culture. Unless you can rally the numbers and set a new expectation, a new vision for the business, that green zone person will either very quickly go red and join the natives, or they'll leave the business, and you have good talent out the door. And yeah, as such, it tends to be the more ruthless people. Again, those people are better at manipulating, blaming, pointing the finger, who thrive in the red zone culture, and it stops you getting what you want to get to, which is a culture of ownership and trust. Because only in that ownership and trust culture that we spoke about, that you're going to get your discretionary effort, your learning organization, and your continuous improvement kind of processes. So as I mentioned, there's a number of benefits to shifting into that green zone culture, and some of the benefits that the research points to is that happy brains are 50% more creative. So people who feel happy in the job and feel like they've got a high level of trust within their organization generally come up with more ideas and better ideas. And that often leads to some great outcomes for organizations. What we find is that in these organizations, the trust also builds solid relationships and prevents infighting between teams. So we tend to find that there's less conflict within these particular groups and within these workplaces. Productivity is generally higher from these teams with high trust as well. As I mentioned earlier, discretionary effort comes into play, greater levels of innovation, team cohesion, and overall stronger resilience. So we tend to find that teams that have a strong sense of psychological safety stick together better when things aren't going to plan. And as a result, they're often to tap into that creativity that we spoke about earlier. They're willing to dig in, have greater discretionary effort, and tend to get better results as a whole. I'm sure for any of you that reflects on times where you may have worked in a red zone versus a green zone culture and how that impacted on you personally, you can certainly notice a difference there. From a strictly safety perspective, again, we tend to find that when we've got high psychological safety and trust, we see better reporting of errors, more willingness to understand the why at-risk behaviours occurred from leadership, a willingness to learn and improve from feedback, a willingness to share lessons learned more broadly, and a willingness to commit to fix errors when they occur, as opposed to waiting for someone else to come along and fix those for us. So the key question here is, how do you build trust within an organization? So we're going to explore this idea by looking at two high-level types or categories of trust. One is cognitive trust and one is effective trust. So getting a little bit academic here for a moment, but just to give you some definitions here, cognitive trust is typically based on performance-related conditions such as competence, reliability, integrity, and dependability. So when these characteristics are demonstrated by a leader, team members are more likely to develop cognitive trust with their leaders and will be more willing to follow directives from their leader as a result. So in summary, if I believe that my leader is competent, knows what they're doing, I'm going to put greater trust in their decision making. Second one is effective trust. And this is trust based on emotional and interpersonal interactions. So higher levels exist when team members experience genuine care and interest in their well-being from their leaders. So this is the real human part of leadership and the real human part of building trust. So the two combined are, I need to be seen as competent at my job, and I need to be seen to actually care about the people that I'm leading. So if we can combine those two, we're actually creating the best forum for trust. So why is this the case? Well, we'll tap into the brain science behind trust. Just I'm going to ask a poll in just a moment, but before I launch it, a couple of quick images to share. Which do you think your brain will perceive as more dangerous? Would it be a roaring lion or being socially excluded? So Sarah, I'll ask you to share that poll if you don't mind. Which do you believe your brain will perceive is more dangerous? A roaring lion or being socially excluded?
Okay, we're nearly there.
Great,
Just a couple more seconds.
I'm curious to see the response to this one.
Looks like a running race from my end. All right, I'll share that now.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, it's tight. It's a 47% to a roaring lion and 53% to being socially excluded. And look, the answer is, in fact, both parties are right. Because in fact, our brains might not actually differentiate between the two situations as well as you might think, because we've got a thing called a social brain, and our social brain will perceive social risk in very similar ways to what it might perceive physical risk. Now, I'm going to ask Sarah to share a video just now, which I think will probably do a much better job of explaining the topic than I, and then we can come back and talk about it a little bit more. So here's a quick animation on our social brain.
All right, have you got the right screen up? Can you see that good? Yep.
I can't see the video.
Humans are social beings. Hang on, I don't think I've done that right.
Yeah,
Hold on.
share the screen.
Is that right?
Hang with us, people. Yeah, perfect. Got it.
Okay. Humans are social beings that thrive when working in groups. Throughout history, we have enhanced our chances of survival by collectively sharing things such as resources, knowledge, and workloads. Alternatively, isolation or rejection from a group could have decreased our survival chances. As a result, our brain is highly aware of our ongoing social status and possible threats or rewards to this. Today, the workplace is one of the biggest social environments the brain experiences. Our brain is constantly providing us with feedback on our social interactions with others. We need to know when things are working in our favor or when our social situation may be under threat. Our brain interprets our social interactions through the use of neural pathways and chemical messages commonly used for pleasure and pain. For example, when our brain recognizes potential rewards from a social interaction, it releases chemicals along the same neural pathways associated with pleasure, making us feel physically good. When we feel threatened, rejected, or taken advantage of, the same pathways that tell us we are in physical pain are activated. Our brains don't always operate in isolation to one another. We often trigger a threat or reward response to the people around us. We may not even realize we are doing this. So the next time you interact with someone at work, consider what social messages you may be sending and the impact you may be having on their brain.
All right, all done. Thank you. Now let's see how we go at resharing screens.
That's it. Yep, all good.
Right. So as you heard in that video, our necessity to be a pack animal, to be socially connected to others, has always been key in our survival, and we still feel the impacts of that to this day. I've still got traumatic memories about being stood in a line at school with two captains as they select teams, and praying that I wasn't the last one to be picked on those teams. And there's actually been lots of psychological experiments that have been done before ethics was such a big deal, that have helped us to demonstrate the impact of social exclusion on the brain. One such experiment was the Cyberball experiment. We've got a little image on the screen here to demonstrate it. So in this particular experiment, people volunteered for an experiment where they played a computer game called Cyberball while their brains were hooked up to an fMRI machine. Cyberball was designed to stimulate some of the narcissists you might see in the school playground, like I just spoke about. And the volunteers joined in on the online ball throwing game. So with two other players. The other two players were not known by the volunteer. All three players would pass the virtual ball back and forwards in the game, but about halfway through the game of catch, where they were playing virtual catch, the volunteers stopped receiving the ball. And it became like a virtual game of piggy in the middle. And so what they actually did is they started to monitor the volunteer, and invariably the volunteer started to react to this perceived exclusion. They spoke of feeling angry and snubbed and judged. And when they were eventually shown, in fact, they were the only human player in the game, the other two players were computer-generated participants programmed to shut the volunteer out. The volunteer actually still continued to express displeasure, and this could all be seen in the fMRI machine in the brain scan. So we could see an illumination in the distressed part of the brain, very similar parts of the brain where you might see physical pain register. So when we trigger this threat response within people's social brains, we're in some ways actually causing them real physical, they feel real harm as a result of that. And that can have huge impacts, of course, on how much trust and safety people feel in those environments. So again, to build on this a little bit, a brain fact that it's worth being aware of is that the same neural pathways that inform pain or pleasure are the same pathways that interpret social experiences as either threatening or rewarding. So again, this is critical to understand as leaders at work, because the way we make people feel impact on that effective trust that we spoke about before. So something to think about is when people engage with you as a leader, how do you make them feel? So I'll step back a little bit. Have a think about the different leaders that you've had that have led you over time. Have you ever had a leader where when you got the opportunity to speak with them, you felt energized, you felt enthusiastic, you felt like as a result of it, you had a clear path forward, and you knew what to do, and you felt empowered to do it? What was it like going to work in those environments? How freely were you? How free were you to speak up? How likely were you to put in your best? And how do you think that impacted on the way that you led other people and impacted on other people? On the flip side, have you had a leader that you really didn't enjoy working for? They didn't make you feel particularly good. Perhaps when you got called into their office, you felt that sinking feeling in your stomach and you felt agitated throughout. Perhaps you had trouble concentrating around them. Yeah, so for that particular scenario, how did it feel going to work? How did it feel in the morning when your alarm went off? And how likely were you to be able to perform at your best within those environments? So what we know is that the leaders who typically trigger that reward mechanism within people's brains promoted the following common traits. Again, they were seen as competent. Competent and predictable and reliable, all those sorts of things that we expect from leaders. But on top of that, humility came through really strongly. Honesty and care were all things which are identified for leaders that were able to trigger those rewards responses and energize people, and were able to create greater psychological safety and trust. So a quick poll, I'm curious to see, out of all of these factors, which leadership traits are more important to you in trusting your leader. So as we can see up on the screen, what are you looking for in order to trust your leader? Are you looking predominantly for competence? Are you looking for humility? Are you looking for honesty? Are you looking for care? We'll run our own little experiment here and see what matters to people on the call.
Okay, nearly there, just a few more seconds.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm going to put that up now.
Excellent. Wow, look at that. Okay, so honesty, way out in front, with competence, humility, and care all sort of trailing behind. So it looks like care was second on the list, followed by humility, and actually competence has come in dead last here. Interestingly, the research says competence is the foundation, and then honesty and care are critical to promoting trust and preventing distrust. So interesting results there for this particular group. Again, they're all very critical things in creating a psychological safe organization. But obviously, for a number of people on the call, trust is critical, which may indicate that they've had leaders in the past that haven't been completely honest at different times, and I certainly know how that can feel. So to take this a little bit further and looking at psychological safety and creating an environment of interpersonal of trust that promotes interpersonal risk-taking, I've got a quick quote to kick us off here. And for anyone that's interested in reading more into this topic, Amy Edmondson's got a great book. She's the author of The Fearless Organization. You can sort of read into, like, she gives you some really good reference points for psychological safety, and she's got a bunch of organization examples and the impact they have at the back of the book. But to set the scene here, she says that if leaders want to unleash individual and collective talent, they must foster a psychologically safe climate where employees feel free to contribute ideas, share information, and report mistakes, much like what we've spoken about. So a couple of practical tools we can use to start to create this psychological safety and trust. One of the first ones, and one that I think we're all capable of doing, is to be transparent. There's nothing like honesty and clarity to help people, and sharing good news and bad news to help people know that you're honest and to therefore foster trust. There are times, of course, when you can't necessarily share everything, but you need to be able to share as much as you can so that people don't feel like they're being information is being hid from them or they're being kept out of the loop. Examples I've had before is one of the services we provide some of our partners is safety culture diagnostics. I've had leaders where safety culture diagnostics have come through unfavorably, where they've said, all right, well, we're just not going to report that information to the business. We're not going to tell them about it because talking about it and telling them about it is going to make things worse. So of course, that starts a whole series of unwanted reactions as a result. So again, sharing as much information as you can with people, the good, the bad, and the ugly is critical. And what it also enables you to do by sharing information is it helps you communicate with them what you need to achieve and what's expected of them in achieving those results. Of course, as leaders, we need to also, often this pushes up to the organization. The organization isn't being transparent or other people aren't being transparent. Of course, we need to lead by example as leaders. So again, one thing we can always control is how transparent we are as individual leaders. Another key tool that we can all use is the idea of active care. So active care talks to getting to know your people and what is important to them and creating opportunities for team members to talk about themselves and to get to know one another. And this starts to tap into this effective trust kind of concept. So you don't have to get into people's personal lives and invite them to barbecues, but remembering their names, maybe remembering their partner's names, knowing what's important to them, knowing what their hobbies are, knowing what they value, showing them that you care about them as people as well as team members is really important. Creating opportunities for people to connect and get to know each other is also a really important part of creating this trust as well. So whether it be taking people off site or spending time in a room where you're facilitating conversations and hopefully and preferably a bit of fun, it creates a huge opportunity for people to connect beyond the workplace. And it does create a different dynamic when you see someone as more than Joe from accounting, that person who's always chasing me up for whatever, versus someone that you actually know and understand a little bit more. Another critical tool we can apply, which is, I remember my grandfather saying to me, I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth and I should use them proportionately. And that is seeking to understand. So what this does in this particular section is encourages leaders to speak second a lot of the time, or if they're going to speak, to ask questions of the group. Understanding what's going on for people, what their opinions are, what their approaches are, demonstrates and role models a learning mindset. It also shows humility and curiosity and helps the individual feel like they're valued and contributing to the result that we're getting. So again, a really easy tool here to immediately start to engage your workforce. Now, again, the challenge with a lot of us as leaders is we get busy. We might believe that we've got the answers in our heads, and we just want to crack on, give people the directions, and get on with things. And look, there are certain circumstances where that's the appropriate course of action, but there are other circumstances where slowing things down a little bit, engaging the group, and asking for the input will not only build the trust, but get greater commitment from the group because they're part of making that decision. Next one to consider, which taps in a little bit to what I spoke about, is giving permission to play. So again, where appropriate, involve your teams in major decisions that impact them. Involve teams so that they can, in a way that enables them to continue to give feedback on a particular job or on a particular project throughout the process, so that people feel heard. And of course, give them that close that feedback loop. I've heard lots of examples of this over the years, whether it be refining and changing a policy across a business, rolling out a cultural program, or procuring equipment. Often in our urgency and our desire to tick a box and get a job done, we make a decision without necessarily fully understanding the implications of those decisions for the people that may be using the machinery or involved in the particular project later down the line. So it becomes a double whammy if we don't give permission to play. It becomes a double whammy because it puts all the pressure on us to get it right, which is very difficult to do if we're not seeing the world from the same position as other people within the business. And it also means that we miss an opportunity to get buy-in and to build that trust through that collaboration and through that engagement of other people. The next one to consider here is develop helpful frames. So how we think we are. So in this instance, it's about helping teams identify with helpful frames regarding their trust for each other and how raising concerns or owning up mistakes helps us all. So we talk about a concept that Sentis called attribution theory. So that's about talking about the comments that use the words because, the types of people, as a result of. So it means that it's about tying the results we're looking for to shared attitudes or belief across the group. So it might be, hey, as a team, we're the type of group that supports one another when the going gets tough. As a team, we're the sorts of people who solve problems together. We get these great results because we're willing to be vulnerable with one another and share the mistakes that we make. So being very deliberate about the language we use in regards to the team and the type of team that we are and the type of culture that we want to prevail is a really, really powerful tool. So again, think deliberately about the team that you want to see and look for opportunities to address that and consciously frame that team in the way that you want to see it. This the last one, the last item there in terms of developing helpful frames feeds really nicely into this idea of early, often, ugly, and this is that idea of it's okay to speak up. So where practical, we need people to see that raising a concern or owning a mistake is okay, particularly if it's captured and if it captures before it captures in a way that stops a bigger issue. So in this instance, obviously, it's important for us to frame two-way communication and collaboration as critical, but being very conscious and deliberate about the way we respond to people when they raise concerns or issues is also really important. I used a scenario at the start of the session where Barry's team lead was tapping his foot impatiently and cut him off before he finished. So it's important, even if you might not think that a particular idea has merit, to create an environment where people can speak up and we give people the time, because it's not only how you respond to that person that affects them, it also sets the scene for how other people expect to be responded to as well. So you might think that you're just talking with Barry, but what you're actually doing is you're setting an example for the rest of the team that says, if I speak up, I get shut down and I get embarrassed in front of the group. So again, thinking consciously about our response is critical if we want to continue to build psychological safety and trust. So I've got another poll here. So what I'm going to ask you to consider is, out of all those tools that we spoke about, what strategy could you use to further develop trust at your work? So what's one that you think you could take away and deliberately put in the place to start to get some positive effect right away? So do you think transparency is an opportunity for yourself or maybe the team, your leadership team? Do you think showing active care is a good place to start? Maybe asking questions, speaking less and asking more. Creating an environment to give permission to play, thinking consciously about the frames we're creating within the team, or encouraging early, often ugly. So if you're going to start somewhere as a result of your investment of time in today's session, where would you kick things off? It's hard to select often.
We probably should have made this multiple choice.
Probably should have, actually.
Just about there. Hold on.
You.
Okay, I'll show it now.
Excellent. Okay, so out in front is seek to understand. Look, really, really great place to start, and actually very practical. Again, it's about being conscious in the moment and stopping yourself when you want to speak. It's not always easy, but setting yourself a goal of asking questions and seeking to understand absolutely is a great place to start. And it also feeds into the encouraging early, often ugly, because often you can be asking people the questions and creating the environment that trigger people to share those learnings and those insights. So a number of what I hope you find to be very practical tools there. As I mentioned, Sarah's going to pass out the slides and the handout after this session along with the video recording. But we have now some time for some questions, and I'm going to just share a couple of other quick things as you share, as you put those questions forward. So I'll let please put them in, and Sarah will collate those, and I'll do my best to respond to those. What we'd like to offer, though, to people on the screen or people on the line who'd like to participate is an opportunity to participate in an executive roundtable. And the roundtable topic that we want to get people involved in is driving safety to protect brand and reduce risk. So we've got limited spaces available. We want to run the session in April 2021. It'll be a 90-minute interactive session, small groups of peer-to-peer networking from your organization. And the goal is, again, to share learnings and insights from organization to organization in this really important topic, but we'll also have some insights to add into that as well. So if you're interested in meeting some of your peers, or if you've got a leader, GM, C-suite, executive who would like to come along with you, please feel free to pass this invite on, or alternatively ask Sarah to pop a poll up on the screen, register your interest, and we'll get in touch with you and see if you're around for that particular roundtable, if you'd like to get involved in that discussion. Again, we had a number of sessions that involved getting small groups together last year with our intensive leadership program, and the resounding feedback was it was excellent to be able to network on a common topic. So we've sharpened it up, and we've made it 90 minutes, and we're providing that opportunity again to you this year. So completely free of charge, just an opportunity for you to get to know some of your peers and talk about an important topic.
Okay, there is another.
There is, yep. Just another one is just a quick one if you'd like to try out online learning on some of these concepts. So this is our flipped classroom program that focuses on psychological skills around building a safe culture. So please click yes if you're interested in being if you're interested in us getting in touch with you about that. And then finally, we've got a bunch of additional complementary resources. So I'll probably close that one out, Sarah, and I'm just mindful of time. Yep. So the last one is, if you want additional resources about this idea of psychological safety and trust, please register your interest, and we'll get in contact with you directly, and we'll send you a bit of a pack that will help you to start this conversation within your business. We're quite blessed. Our new head of psychology, Dr. Amy, across from Griffith University, is an absolute guru in this space, and has put together some really good ideas and insights to share with you all. So please register your interest.
All right. Well, some very positive response there. So, Anthony, we don't have any questions as yet. So I'll just leave that a couple of minutes. I just want to share the next webinar that's coming up in the chat. It is about the Health and Safety Index. It's a survey that received 120,000 responses across several Australian and New Zealand industries in 2020. And the presenters, Mark Wright and Kate from FAFO Consulting, will discuss the top results, the lowest results, and the highest predictors. And that is next Thursday. So I'll put that in the chat. And the other one is sorry, I have to make sure it goes to everyone. And the next one after that is about the COVID-19 vaccine and what are the legal issues for employers. And that's on February 25th. That's presented by Brian Jackson. He's special counsel for Moray and Agnew, and that should be very interesting too. Be happy to see, it'd be interesting to see people's comments for that one. So again, Anthony, no questions as yet. Obviously, you covered everything really well. We'll have your contact details in the email as well. So if they do have questions or any interest in those other resources, they'll be in contact. So,
excellent. Well, look, thank you all for joining us.
There's a question. That always happens. All right. This is anonymous. Are you seeing any changes with building trust within team given the shift of remote workforce with COVID?
Oh, look, it's a real challenge, I think, for a number of organisations. I think in organisations where they haven't deliberately put meeting rhythms and connections into place, yes, I am. I think that it's very easy to dehumanize someone when you're not seeing them regularly. So I think what a lot of organizations are really focusing on in a controlled fashion at the moment is creating opportunities for FaceTime, within those particular spaces. Look, on the flip side, other organizations have managed to transition really well, where you've got clear meeting rhythms, clear collaboration spaces where they're using technology really, really well. I don't think they're necessarily feeling the pain as much, but some organizations are really, I think, struggling with that transition and of working remotely and not seeing people face to face. So, yeah.
Declan asks, if an organisation is going through a large realignment, does that undermine trust because of redundancies, etc.?
Look, it can, and often that will come down to a lot of the factors that we spoke about throughout the session. So how transparent are we being? How honest are we being? How clear are we being around where we're heading and why we're heading there? Look, people don't like to see roles being made redundant. They miss their friends, they miss their peers. But what exacerbates that problem is if people feel like it's a surprise and they don't understand the reason why. People understand the reason why if it's transparent, and if they feel like the people who are exiting the business are being treated with respect and being supported to find new employment, and if there's a clear strategy to secure people's roles and a vision, organizations can build a lot of cred with their people through the way they handle it. But I think because it's not a nice thing and because people feel a bit yucky about the whole thing, there's a tendency to rush it, to not communicate clearly, to be awkward about what they can share and what they can't share, and to probably not be as conscious and deliberate in the way they handle it. So Declan, it really does come down to planning, and some of those leadership traits that we spoke about throughout the session.
One asks, have we got notes for this? And there is a handout that's coming as a PDF with the email and the event page later.
And look, one, I'd encourage you to register for the additional complimentary resources. There'll be a bunch of stuff in there that will be very useful.
Ray says, have you seen a significant movement from red to green areas for not-for-profit organisations?
Yes, we actually we have. We've got a real success story. We're hoping we can share a case study with now. They were an example of using safety and safety culture as a lever. So although the hazards probably weren't as significant as some of the industries we work with. I mean, we work with mines and construction and utilities and the like. They still had significant hazards which could cause people harm, both psychological and physical. So that particular group really focused on leadership, demonstrating care. In this particular industry, there's a real push to put probably patients above staff, and as a result, they saw some amazing traction in fairly short time frames, because people, there's a common vision to align to. Leaders had an agreed way of behaving and talking to the business, and because you had those clear anchor points to demonstrate care, being around safety and psychological safety, leaders all of a sudden felt empowered and knew what to do. I think sometimes when it comes to leadership initiatives and programs, we sort of give leaders a bunch of ideas and tools, but they actually struggle to know when and how to apply them, where sometimes focusing on safety, you can say, well, we want you to focus on this particular activity and getting better at that, and then we'll build the capability. So yes, certainly have seen some good results in that space just recently.
And one more question: where trust has been depleted due to poor leadership, where is the starting point to rebuild this trust?
My experience is calling the elephant in the room. If you have a low level of trust caused by a range of factors, including leadership, and even if you're involved as part of that leadership group that might have been part of eroding the trust, my strong recommendation would be to absolutely call a spade a spade. So call the behaviors that have got to where you've got to, call the circumstances that have contributed to the result, and be really, really clear in that, and be willing to wear whatever flack or fallout comes as a result of that. So, have a bloodletting if you like. That's the first step, because that ownership in itself will diffuse the conversation. The longer you pretend it doesn't happen, the more it festers and the more it grows. What's then critical, once you've addressed the problem, you've called it and it's out in the open, is to have a plan as to what you're going to do about it, commit to that plan, and actually do the thing that you commit to, and let people know when you've achieved those results. And again, that constant communication. We said we were going to do this, we did it. We said we were going to do this, we did it. Surveying people, getting their feedback, taking them on the journey becomes really important. But calling a spade straight up is where you'd start.
Okay, I think we're on time now, so we'll let that. We'll wrap up now. It's coffee time. I'd like to thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us once again today. It's been really, really a good session, and we'll send that email out with everything, all the links later today. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good week.
Pleasure. See you all again soon.
Thank you, Anthony. Bye.